Welcome to the arena, where sometimes the hardest part is showing up. My name is Linda McLaughlin. Thank you for being here. Shastri Ramnath has some impressive business credentials. Her sharp mind, engaging personality, and optimism have won over some of the most entrenched industry leaders. But first and foremost, she is a thoughtful and compassionate human being. I hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you for listening. This is episode 5.
So I have to laugh. There's a jackhammer outside my window right now.
Oh, of course there is.
On the street. So I don't know if you can hear it.
Oh, just slightly. So
Okay.
I should be able to kind of get rid of that in the background.
Are you doing a couple of these podcasts or what? Like, do you mind giving me just sort of I read what you sent.
What I wanted to do was basically focus on people in our everyday lives who show up courageously. There's a connection to my own story around personal change and personal development. So often people say, oh, you're so brave. You're so brave for doing this. And I always think, well, what's the big deal? But I've come to realize there's something about putting yourself out there that not everybody's prepared to do, or that it's harder for some people than others.
Yeah.
When I started to think about the people around me, there's quite a number of people, and specifically women, who I think show up quite courageously every day and really lean into either personal growth or personal development, or just pushing themselves to go further. So obviously you got put on that list.
Well, you know what? The first thing is thank you for thinking of me. And I feel really honored that you categorized me with those people. So thank you for that.
Oh,
I appreciate it. So that saying you sent me. And honestly, today's probably not the best day for a podcast because I'm pretty exhausted. But I think about people who don't put themselves out. You don't feel the highs and the lows if you never really are exposed to either of those.
You're referring to the Man in the Arena speech?
Yeah.
From Theodore Roosevelt? Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing piece of writing. It really puts in perspective those who put themselves out and those who don't. Yeah. And you, my dear, are one of those people in my mind.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know what? It means something to me because when you put yourself out there, there's so many more critics than people who go, wow. Anyway, so thank you for acknowledging that. I probably need it more now than ever.
So here's my intro for you. Shastri Ramnath is a woman who sees opportunity all around her. She is the co-founder, CEO, director, or chair of 5 companies in the mining industry. She is a professional geoscientist and an MBA. She calls herself an overeducated geopreneur. She has received accolades for her work as a woman CEO and for carving a path for women in the mining industry. She is often the only woman or diverse person at the board table, a fact she is actively working to change. One of her companies, Oryx Geoscience, a geological consulting firm, has an even split between men and women in all positions, which is unheard of in the mining industry. Shastri is a doting mom, an amazing cook, an incredible storyteller with a wicked sense of humor.
Thank you. It's very kind. Thank you.
You're welcome. We met about a year ago, I guess. And I was captivated by you, just your energy and generosity and, as I say, wicked sense of humor. I just was so taken by your spirit and desire to learn and just leaning in at every opportunity. And then as I've realized over the last year or so, all the things that you're working on, that you're engaged in, and how much you're trying to make a difference in the world. It's been really inspiring to watch you, never mind moving house several times and everything else that's been going on. As she rolls her eyes. So tell me about the dinner table when you were growing up.
Well, what immediately pops into mind, which is kind of funny, is when I think about eating dinner with my family. There were 4 kids. I was the oldest of the 4, 2 girls, 2 boys, my mom and dad, and they were really good about having us sit at the dinner table. But the first thing we all did was look to see what was being served. And for example, if it was a shrimp curry, we would all secretly try and take all the shrimp. So it was a lot of commotion whenever we would sit down at the beginning because there was only so many to go around. And we would accuse each other of hogging different items, but we always ate as a family. We always sat down and ate as a family. And I remember my mom always asking every second or third week, she'd be like, Shastri, what do you want for dinner this week? And I thought that was really interesting in hindsight that I think she probably did that with all of us. So it was kind of neat. We actually had a say in what we were able to eat. And I appreciate that now when I look back.
What was your favorite dish?
Well, we always liked the West Indian food, for sure, all the West Indian foods. But in Manitoba, where I grew up, my mother's Mennonite. There was this Mennonite sausage that is, it's super delicious to people in Manitoba. But I brought it to Ontario and people were like, this is what you've been talking about?
Okay, you have to tell me more.
Dry, maybe it's just the way we cook it, but it's farmer sausage, Mennonite
Right.
farmer sausage. But it's very unique to Manitoba. I don't think I've ever actually found it here yet. I've been here 18 years in Ontario. So that was one of the treats was we'd be having farmer sausage and we would just eat that. So yeah, that was one of my favorites.
So your friends are happy that you haven't actually found it here. Is that what you're telling me?
I actually bring it in my suitcase all the time. My mom gives me about 6 of them frozen. And Scott's always cringing when he sees me pull them out. Oh, we're having that. I'm like, yes, how lucky.
Is there an event in your life that's had a profound impact?
My life pivoted the year I spent in South Africa.
Hmm.
I was a different person before I left than when I came back. And I remember before, little things always bothered me. I always wanted to have higher marks and I was always worried about perception of myself. I mean, I was also in my 20s, so, worried about the small stuff. And when I went to South Africa for my Master's of Geological Sciences at Rhodes University, and it was right after apartheid, which was really interesting because my father and my mother are different colors, so I'm biracial. But I never even thought about it. This is the ironic part. Before I went there, I just had my parents that were my parents, and I never really even saw that they were different. I knew we were different because we ate different foods, and obviously we were darker than my mother, who's blonde. But when I went down to South Africa, and it was right after apartheid, the racism was surprising to me and it was shocking to me. And I also saw people with nothing. I saw AIDS and HIV in kids. I volunteered at a hospital once a week. I spent time with kids and a little boy who died. I was sitting with him and reading a story and he died. I remember thinking, I am never going to complain about paying taxes. And I will always be grateful for Canada. And I see it in the pandemic as well. I've really seen that benefit of being in a country like Canada. And so my life changed. When I came back from South Africa, I really saw the world differently. I felt braver. I really did feel braver because I felt like when you're given a place in society or a certain good fortune, you need to use that for the better of the world. And so I chose to do it through creating employment and wealth for people. But ultimately, it'd be nice to generate enough wealth to be able to go and directly impact other places. And so I think that's the ultimate goal. But yeah, back to the question, the year I spent in South Africa changed me.
How does courage show up in your life, having had that experience in South Africa?
I feel like the worst thing that could happen is never as bad as the worst thing that could happen if I was born into poverty in Africa. So in Africa, to me, especially as a woman, there are things that happen to people. The worst things can be death. It can be tragedy to people around you. I feel like in Canada, you can get that. But I always think, I can always go home to my parents, which is a driver to not have to go home to my parents. But there's always a backup plan that's not as bad as where it could be elsewhere. And so I feel like it's easier to be courageous here. And I often think about my father who came to Canada at 19 years old. He didn't have much money. He came here to go to university, and which was all his father's savings for his kids to come to Canada. How scary that would be. You come to a country where you don't know the culture. It's a more developed country. Your currency's worth less. You've never experienced the cold. You don't have people to come out and support you. You're a different color. You have a different background. And I think that is really scary. I think being already here and having the infrastructure makes it easier. I often don't feel like I'm that courageous. I feel like I've seen real courage, which probably gives me courage to go, well, this can't be that bad. So I'm going to jump in and try it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mentioned in your introduction, which is an introduction light because you've achieved so much. I really wanted to just give people a sense of where you're coming from. But what I've seen from the sidelines is how much you take on the mantle of being someone who is an innovator, someone who is at the forefront, someone who is sometimes the only when you're sitting around those board tables, and you're really cutting a swath for a new generation, a new way of being in the mining industry in particular, but I think it goes well beyond your impact in that industry. As a woman who is leading and starting a number of different businesses, and I've also seen you be a mentor to a number of women who maybe don't have as much courage and maybe haven't had the experiences that you've had, and really bringing them forward and pushing them out front for their opportunity to be leaders as well. What's important about that role as a woman, as an entrepreneur, as someone who's making changes in the mining industry?
The most important thing, I think, in life to me is being fulfilled, at peace, being content. And it's great to have money and it's great to have the conveniences of life. But at the end of the day, I think being fulfilled is really important. It's funny when I think about it, I'm trying to think what's important about leading a new generation or being cognizant of other people is that I just don't want other people to feel like they can't do something. And I see so much talent in women and young people in general, men and women who are young, and talent in people who weren't born in our country or born in North America. I think there's just so much more to offer the world. And I think that those people should also feel at peace and be able to do the things in life they want to do. I like leading difference. I don't know how to explain that, but I think seeing, and it's not just about leading, it's about just having this network of women and young people and people who belong to the LGBTQ community and being able to allow people to be themselves, but also succeed in life. And I don't know, there's some joy that I get out of that. People shouldn't have to conform to what they're supposed to be like. They should just be allowed to be themselves. And often there's something in there that is an enormous amount of talent to something that they may not be able to tap into unless they're given an environment.
What do you think is essential to living a courageous life?
Oh, well, it's easy to say this, but it's harder to do it. And I still struggle with it. But being able to move forward and to not take things super personally when there are criticisms or judgments that are unfair. I think that I've really had to work on the mindset of, well, I can see how that person would think that, but they didn't walk in these shoes and they didn't make the decisions that led up to that particular situation. They actually don't know all the impact that this has. And so being forgiving of somebody being judgmental. And the other thing is, as businesses grow, there's always going to be somebody who's critical and hard, especially on the CEO or on the top people. It can be hard to take, but having courage includes being able to accept that people just won't agree or like you or treat you poorly and being okay with that. And that's really hard because the other thing is when people go, well, don't take it personally, it's business. Take everything personally. You're supposed to take it personally. It's your life. It's, if you have a career, then if somebody doesn't like the work you're doing, I right away want to understand why, because I want it to be better. And it is, I think we should take things personally because then it means it's important to us.
I see you take a really humanistic approach to being a leader and wanting to build bridges, wanting to reach out to people, wanting to, as you say, create an environment in which people can be themselves and be an employee. I'd say that's an unusual approach. It's maybe an approach that more businesses need to take, but I just want to acknowledge that.
It's interesting when we interview people. I always feel like by the time they get to an interview with me, their technical side is there and their general personality is probably going to make a good fit. But I always like knowing what people are interested in. And I feel like just understanding their interest gives you a lot of insight into people. And so, or what kind of books they like to read or what kind of movies they like to watch. And I always like hearing, and often I'm surprised at what they choose to like. And it gives you a lot of insight into the person because often they'll say something. I remember one guy, he liked bowling. And I was like, bowling? That is the coolest thing ever, that he was super into bowling. So then I went bowling after that. And so I think sometimes you're in that tunnel in life. And then when you find out somebody else does something, you're like, oh my goodness, that's super neat.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
What would you like your legacy to be?
I think I'd like my legacy to be that I was always a kind and generous person, but that I also stood up for what is right, whether it be a concept or for a person, just being somebody who speaks up and doesn't just wilt away and let the world go by.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
One of my mentors changed my life in a moment when he said something in particular to me. I was leaving Sudbury to go off to Toronto to be the CEO for the first time of a junior exploration company that was listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And he said to me, if you meet somebody who doesn't like you and is critical of you, then you don't need to do business with them. Because if they don't see value in you and what you have to offer, then as far as I'm concerned, I think the words he used was, they're stupid. But he said, if they don't see you for who you are, then you don't want to do business with them anyway. And I remember in that moment, I went, you're right. Why would I prove to somebody that I'm worth doing business with? And from that point forward, if somebody doesn't get what we do or they're questioning us and they're like, I don't see how you could possibly help, my immediate reaction is, that's fine. Good luck. And yeah, I wish you the best. I just always think, you know what? If we keep our eye focused on doing business with people who have integrity, are kind, are forward-looking, we'll be more successful. And that applies to friends, family, employees, colleagues, people outside the company, clients, or investors. As long as people have a certain level of respect, integrity, and courtesy, and it doesn't mean everybody agrees all the time, but if we're looking in the same direction, life will just be easier for everyone. So removing the people who don't see the world the same way is really important to me, and it's non-negotiable. So there's my last comment.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me.
I should mention, Shastri was in the middle of a home renovation when we spoke, and like many of you, also had her young son at home. So I was grateful she was able to squeeze in our conversation and talk about her perspective on courage. Thank you once again for listening. Please subscribe, and if you feel someone else might benefit from listening to this podcast, please share it or leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I look forward to sharing my next guest story of thriving through cancer. She lives in Jordan, and she just lights up a room. Until next time, I'm your host, Linda McLaughlin in The Arena.